Okay, thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. We're so happy to have you join us. We are going to start our webinar shortly here. Just to remind you, our topic of discussion today is global competence for leaders in higher education. This is part of a week-long series of International Education Week here at AFS Intercultural Programs. And this is the first session of multiple webinars that will be taking place this week. So don't forget to check out all the offerings that we have. We'll share the link here shortly with you all. But today I'm so honored to be joined by staff and deans and executive director of Southern New Hampshire University. I'll introduce my panelists in just a moment here. We have Dr. Diego Nocetti and Dr. Jennifer Teague. But first, we'd kind of like to hear from you. Who do we have in the room with us today? So I'm going to launch a poll to have you share where you're joining us from. Just a moment here. I'm going to ask my colleague Pablo to help me launch my poll because it's not appearing for me.
Not a problem.
Thank you.
We're launching the what is your role poll, right?
That would be great. First, we'd like to kind of hear what is your role at your organization? So we've got a couple options there. Are you a volunteer? Are you a student? Are you a program team member, director, educator, administrator? Are you an executive, faculty, or maybe something else not on this list? So we'll just share for a couple more seconds as well. Okay. So I'll share our results. So it looks like we've got, yes, a couple volunteers with us today. Thank you. Students, program team members, directors, those who are classifying their work as educator, administrator, executive, and faculty. Wonderful. Thank you all for sharing. Now I'd like to hear where you're joining from in the world to kind of give us an idea of how global our reach is today. All right, I'll just keep that up for another 10 seconds. So far, it's looking very global. Okay, wonderful. So just so our panelists can see, we're having a lot of people join from Africa, Asia, the Caribbean. We've got some folks from Eastern Europe, European Union, Middle East, North America, Oceania, and South America. So wow, yes, from all over the world today. Thank you for joining us. And that means we are kind of covering all time zones. So thanks again. If it's late, early, we're happy to have you here. So just to kind of help us understand how we'll make, use of this time we have together today, I've got a quick agenda. We'll go over introductions of our panelists. I have a couple of questions prepared for them as well to kind of dive into this topic of global competence in higher education leadership. We will have time for your questions. So please feel free in the chat to start to ask questions that you have, whether it be specific to your organization or more general across the field of international education. We're welcoming all of your questions. We'll summarize our key takeaways, and then at the end, there will be a brief survey about, what this webinar did in terms of your learning and the impact it had on you. So please do fill that out at the end. I want to give a little context if you're not familiar with AFS Intercultural Programs. We are a nonprofit organization that is in 59, or we have 59 organizations around the world in 60 countries. There's about 12,000 student exchanges that happen each year as a part of our programming. We have a lot of options for volunteers, so some of you may be AFS volunteers that are on the call today. They really help run our organization with, helping with host families and students and orientations and all the things that our programs impact. We have 10,000 host families that welcome students into their homes every year. 5,000 school alliances, and we reach schools by partnering up with educators. Over 100,000 educators reached through partnerships, digital education program, and other ways as well. So today, when we're talking about global competence, I wanted to also give just a little insight into a tool that AFS has called the Global Up program. We have a digital education program called Global Up that empowers students, faculty, and staff with tangible global skills that are essential to live, learn, work, and make a positive social impact in diverse settings on campus, at work, in local communities, and around the world. So universities are able to implement several of our different versions for their use. So some universities use our Global Up Abroad program, which complements a study abroad program. Anything from 2 weeks all the way to a year program could use this for preparing them for the experience, helping them kind of make sense of it while they're abroad, and debriefing it after they return. We have a version for students who are not studying abroad called Global Up at Home, and then one that is primarily focused on professional development called Global Up at Work. So I wanted to just bring those to your attention in case you hear about this, during our conversation and want more information. Anyone who goes through a Global Up program also is eligible to receive a Credly badge that recognizes their achievement. So the Credly badge can be easily displayed on your LinkedIn profile, and it shows that you've earned this credential and have gone through this program that shows your certification. So I'll start with my introduction of Dr. Jennifer Teague, and I will redo her bio here, but if you'd like to read along with me, you're welcome to. Dr. Jennifer Teague is a leader in global education with over 2 decades of transformative experience across the US, UK, and Norway. As the executive director of an online business program at Southern New Hampshire University, she drives innovation in virtual experiential learning, opening new horizons for diverse first-generation students worldwide. As a respected researcher and speaker, Dr. Teague specializes in cross-cultural management and is committed to democratizing online learning through globally immersive experiences, helping students bridge cultural gaps and excel in an increasingly interconnected world. She's also a qualified facilitator of our Global Up program. Known for her strategic vision, Dr. Teague fosters inclusivity and leadership agility, empowering future global leaders with skills they need to thrive in diverse environments. So we're happy to have you join us today, Dr. Teague. Thank you. And Dr. Diego Nocetti, he serves as the Dean of the School of Business at Southern New Hampshire University. We also refer to this university as SNHU for short. He specializes in decision-making under uncertainty and behavioral economics, applying these insights to both academic leadership and research. Originally from Argentina, Diego completed his MBA at East Carolina University and earned a PhD in economics from the University of Memphis. Before joining SNHU, he served as the Dean of Clarkson University Ray School of Business, where he was also an endowed professor. Diego has published over 30 articles on risk-taking behavior, public policy, and economic incentives, and has received multiple awards for his research contributions. So we're so happy to have you join us as well, Dr. Nocetti. So I'll first turn my question to Jennifer, just to kind of help the audience understand a little bit about the context of SNHU. So can you share a little bit about your university and your role, Jennifer?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Molly. And thank you for everybody making time not only to celebrate International Education Week, but to celebrate it with us on a Monday morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you are. So SNHU is the largest university in North America. And those are some big numbers on that screen, but those are actually a little bit dated. We actually, at last count, serve about 245,000 learners worldwide. So the scale and impact is phenomenal. We have over 13,000 employees and over 200,000 alumni. You can read those numbers there on the screen, but what really is constantly both terrifying and exciting is the scope of opportunity that we have to truly impact student lives. So if you're familiar with SNHU, if you're in North America, you probably think of SNHU as an online university, and that is partially true. We do have a very large online presence, and those are the programs that I'm responsible for, specifically in regards to business. So in Global Campus, which is our online campus, we serve about 90,000 business learners. And to give some context, I'm going to hand over to Diego. He is my counterpart. We have different titles, but serve the same functions online versus on campus. Diego?
Thanks, Jennifer. And thank you, Molly, and everyone that is here. It is a pleasure to be here. So I oversee the campus unit of the business unit for SNHU. We are in Manchester, beautiful Manchester, New Hampshire. And the School of Business has about 800 undergraduate students and about 500 graduate students. We have programs in different areas of business. We have also a PhD in international business. I want to emphasize something. Jennifer is quite humble in terms of when she speaks about the business unit that she oversees. She manages 90,000 students. That makes it probably, I'm most likely the largest business unit in the country and potentially in the world, which is quite something. My unit is a traditional on-campus unit, and we serve somewhat different students, but the objectives are the same, the objective of transforming their lives, making their lives better.
Wonderful. Thank you. So I'm going to stop sharing our screen just for a moment, or for this discussion, so we can kind of just dialogue between us all. So Jennifer, I'll start with this question for you. You've been a champion of global competence learning and training wherever you've found yourself within higher education. In fact, I met her when she was working at a previous university. So I'm wondering, what's so important about this type of education to you, and why are you bringing a new cohort of higher ed administrators into this learning at SNHU?
I appreciate that, Molly. And I appreciate that call out, Diego. I try not to think too hard about it. That's where the terrifying part comes in. For me, global competence and having those globally oriented skills, intercultural fluency, that's near and dear to me personally. And as a scholar, my own area is in the area of international management, my own area of research and teaching. And before I moved into an administrative role, there was very much a shift in higher ed. When I entered the field about 25 years ago, we used to talk about global business or international business as the standalone entity. We taught it outside of the regular curriculum. And then there was a shift where, with increasing globalization, we were saying in higher ed, well, who doesn't need these skills? And so there was kind of a pull away from international business or international management as a separate entity. We said, okay, we're going to integrate it into all our classes. But the problem with that is that, yes, we all need to be aware of globalization and how it impacts different business fields, but there are very unique skills involved in having intercultural fluency. So I think this call out and the work that AFS does through the Global Up program is so very important, because it gives us a space to talk about specifically, what does global competence mean? And how do we demonstrate it? How do we flex those skills? And global competence, to me, isn't just what we would have defined it as a couple of decades ago, which is, relying on the Hofstede definitions of what nationality looks like. That was how we defined global competence. I can tell you the difference between communication styles in Japan versus the United States. It is that, and it's also understanding bias and how that impacts us as individuals but also how it impacts how people see us and how we can acknowledge implicit bias and hopefully mitigate some of the effects when we're dealing with others. It's also giving us space to talk about power and privilege. And, you know, if you listen to the news, not just in the US, in any country, we're in a moment of great divide. And having global competence means building those bridges. Sometimes it's based on differences in nationality, but more often than not, it's recognizing where do we have commonality. And when you study global competence and when you flex those skills, you start off from a place of acceptance and tolerance that we all really want the same thing. We want safety, we want happiness, we want to feel comfortable and secure, we want a better life for ourselves and for our families. If you start there, then unpacking what differences look like are a tool for understanding, as opposed to just a way for us to talk about how we're different. So understanding all of that is why it's important to me personally. And I've been involved with the Global Up curriculum for students in my previous role. When moving into my role at SNHU, one of the things that felt important to me, because my team is all over the country and they're serving learners all over the world. So I wanted them to be models of global competence, because when you can do it, you can help other people do it. So we're starting first, instead of starting with students, we're actually starting with our administrators, with the idea of a trickle-down effect, so that if our administrators, our instructional designers, our faculty can speak intercultural, then they're going to be able to demonstrate that and model it for others. What about you, Diego? I know it's been a theme for you as well in your career.
Yeah, definitely. Again, from my perspective, understanding, I'm aligned 100% with what you were saying, particularly in terms of understanding each other. You talked about global competence as understanding each other. I actually think that when we think about global competence, it is about understanding who we work with, understanding the markets we serve, and the markets that we could serve. And the way I see my job, and in general, leadership, it is about building trust and relation. I tend to think about relationship capital every time as a leader, but also as a professor. When I think about communicating with others, I think about, okay, we are building relationship capital, building trust. But again, leaders in general, we are building trust, solving complex problems, and try to identify and leverage market opportunities. And if I think about global competence, I think the person that doesn't have this is one who does not understand the people they work with, who does not understand the markets. I think you cannot build trust and relationships if you don't understand and actually celebrate cultural differences. I think for me, one part, we tend to think of sometimes doing the minimum, the basics. And yes, I understand you are different, but are we celebrating those differences? I mean, many times we are not. And I definitely think I think about someone, a leader that has global competence, I think about someone that is celebrating those differences. Of course, the other side of that perspective, the worst part is leaders that actually disrespect others because they do not understand. They do not understand them. I mentioned before, solving complex problems. You cannot solve complex problems if you're stuck on your own view of the world, which you mentioned that, Jennifer, your own biased view of the world. We all have those biases. I don't think you can solve those complex problems by yourself if you do not understand the others. And you cannot exploit market opportunities if you lack an understanding of those markets and your potential customers. So again, when I think about global competence, I think about all of them, but in particular, understanding, having an understanding of each other, respecting, mutual respect.
I like
I
that
think
call
that's
out, Diego.
beautifully stated. Yes.
You can tell which one of us is the economist. You're absolutely right about the market opportunities. And, you know, when you were saying celebrating diversity, I think because this idea of diversity has become another polarizing topic, a lot of folks view global competence as just a tick box. I've got to do it because they tell me I have to. And we really miss an opportunity. We do miss not only a market opportunity, but also a human opportunity. And why, you know, whether you're a student or volunteer, or you're knee deep working in higher ed, recognizing those market opportunities. I'm teasing a little about the economic perspective, because when we recognize opportunity, what we're actually recognizing is that there's a gap that needs to be filled. And this gap is so important because what we're recognizing is people don't have the tools to see across or past their own vision of the world. So when we recognize those gaps, then we can help as educators help cure it, help be part of that solution. I love that call out.
Yeah, and it's both. I think it is the human side, and
Yeah.
it is the economic side.
For
So
sure, we wouldn't have
economics
jobs
doesn't have the
otherwise.
human side, but it is both. And I think we are both saying also that global competence is part of the broader human side of diversity, equity, and inclusion competence.
Absolutely.
Yes. Beautifully stated. And I agree. It kind of is one of those things that it can really help across the spectrum of all the people you encounter in your life, from personal relationships to business relationships. That's certainly what we've heard from learners that go through the Global Up program. Diego, you started to touch on some of these instances, but I'm curious if there's more you'd want to share. Like, what do you think is the risk of not providing leaders with this type of training or education? What could they be missing if they don't get global competence training?
Market opportunities.
I'm going to put it in one word as a good economist. When I think about someone that doesn't have these skills, doesn't use these skills, I cannot see how this person can be competent. I cannot see how this person can be effective at this work. So I mentioned about building trust and relationships. It's the risk is you cannot build strong relationships if you do not understand and do not have global competence. You will not celebrate differences if you do not have that competence. You will be biased in terms of the way you think and in terms of how you solve problems, and you will always solve problems the same way. And we know that when we have diverse perspectives, it does make a difference in terms of being more creative and really solving problems. And going back to the market opportunities, I think the risk is not being able to exploit those opportunities, not identifying the opportunities or not leveraging fully the opportunities that we do identify.
I see. I kind of want to put either of you on the spot to ask for an example of celebrating differences, because I think so often we have leaders that want to look at those similarities and focus in on similarities and commonalities. So when you say a leader would celebrate differences, is there an example that comes to mind of how that plays out or what that looks like?
I can think of, as Diego was talking, I was actually thinking about the meeting I was in this morning. So I can think of two great examples just recently. one as recent as an hour ago. We are undergoing annual strategic planning in the institution, like many of you may be starting to do. And we have been asked when we're the lead of particular strategies to build a team to help us talk about how we would activate these strategies. And the encouragement that we've gotten, and then I think that we've adopted internally, is I need diverse perspectives. And so in recognizing that I might be leader over one area and have one sort of view of the world, I need people who are going to be operating in areas that are so far outside my sphere of influence and my scope of knowledge. I have to be very intentional about bringing them into those conversations. And that's not just from a professional lens. You know, I work in academics. I need someone from marketing or from advising, but I need a range of leadership levels. I need frontline contributors in those conversations. I need people that represent different age, different races and ethnicities, different lived experiences. And so assembling those teams has been a very active way of acknowledging and celebrating. We need all these voices in the room. And a kind of more midterm example, one of the things I've done with my team, I'm really fortunate to have a very diverse team of associate deans serving our online students. And we often spend time talking about the celebrations that are important to us. So I spent a long time working in Norway. So I have a particular holiday for those of you, maybe if you're in Norway, the 17. of May, that is very important in Norway and has become kind of a family celebration. So that's something that I can share with the team, or those that might have different religious differences or national differences. They can share with us, you know, hey, this is something that's really important to me. And sometimes it's a more mainstream holiday, but they celebrate in a certain way. So it's just a fun way of connecting and honoring not just that those differences exist, but what they mean to us and how we can acknowledge those and sort of build those connections, those relationships like Diego was talking about.
Beautiful. Diego, did anything come to mind for you and what's
Yes,
celebrating
I can
the
add
difference?
something very
Yeah.
similar. The day-to-day, so Jennifer and I studied at Southern New Hampshire University a little bit more than 1 year ago. And I think an example of this is the work that we do, the daily work that Jennifer and I do. And the reason that I'm saying that is SNHU is quite particular in terms of leadership of the School of Business. Most School of Business have one dean and have one dean. We have two people, Jennifer and I, overseeing the School of Business, the broad School of Business. Jennifer focused on online, and in my case, focus on the campus unit. But there are many parts, many things that we do together and that we share. The reason that we work well together and that we have solved so many problems is because it is a team of two people with diverse perspectives. If yes, we agree on many things with Jennifer and we have similar background in some sense, but also we have diverse perspectives, and it is that part that I think makes such a big difference in terms of the solutions that we have been and the impact that we've been having on Southern New Hampshire University and our students in particular.
I love that.
I love that
Thank
call
you.
out, Diego. And I think you're absolutely right. We agree on a lot, but based on our personal perspectives and history and based on the students we serve, Diego serves the more traditional 18 to 22-year-old learner, whereas I typically serve the new majority, the non-traditional adult learner. And so sometimes even though we have the same vision for something, how we execute it might differ. And what's been great is I always know that even if we disagree, I always have complete confidence that we're going to come up with a solution that's going to work for all of our learners. And there's great comfort when you have that knowledge and that safety that it's okay to have different viewpoints, because this is a strong enough relationship that we're going to be able to figure it out together. And I think that speaks to global competence, that when we recognize why our perspectives might be different, it helps us feel freer to acknowledge the differences, but not to be afraid of them, not to let them be a source of conflict.
Beautifully said. It makes me think you both sound like you have incredible depth to your self-awareness too, to know what could I be missing and what other perspectives could be helpful here, as you're doing all the different, tasks at work. So thank you for sharing those stories and examples. Speaking of stories, Jennifer, I'm wondering if you could tell me a story about where you've seen global competence recently make a meaningful difference at work or with students.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to come back to what you were saying, I appreciate that acknowledgement, Molly. When I joined SNHU, when I left my previous institution, which was fabulous, I had a chat with the dean of the School of Business that I was leaving, and he said, just remember, nobody has it all figured out. We're all figuring it out as we go. And I think the more we say that as senior leaders, that we normalize, it's okay not to have all the answers. That's part of global competence, because there's a level of humility involved. It can be scary to say, oh, I'm in a leadership position and I don't know that. But when you know that you have a strong network that is going to support you and that you can reach out to get those diverse perspectives to ensure you're not missing something, I think there's so much value there. I do love a story. So to come back to your question about making a meaningful contribution. So I feel like I need to give you a little bit of my backstory as to why this was so moving for me. So despite my very worldly accent, I grew up in a very small town in Texas where everybody looked and sounded and believed like I did. And I knew there were more perspectives out there and I just wasn't seeing them. And the second I finished my MBA, I had a chance to participate in a study abroad experience. And I very much remember standing in the middle of a European capital and looking around and thinking, this whole world's been going on this whole time. And I had no idea. And it was just one of those light bulb, life-changing moments. And I came home, I applied for a PhD program in Scotland and left the US and was gone for about 15, 16 years because I wanted to soak up all of these differences. So this has always been very personal for me, and study abroad has been a very big part of that. Now, you will remember that I serve online learners, so it's not easy to get those folks from all these varied locations onto a plane, all going to the same location. So one of the things that I'm most proud of in my career was when I first met Molly, I was in the process of developing a real life in-person study abroad opportunity for online learners. And when we think of global competence, sometimes there's a Western-centric view that it's Westerners understanding what the rest of the world is like. And I think it's so important to dispel that everybody is striving for global competence, no matter where they are. So as part of the first cohort of students that I took on this online student education abroad experience, we went to London. And I had an absolutely amazing student. I'll call him Jim, not his name, but he was from Nigeria. And Jim had lived in the US for quite a few years. And he was such a wonderful person. And I remember being in Westminster Abbey with him. And we were stood at the tomb of Queens Mary and Queen Elizabeth, single tomb. And he turned and looked at me and he had tears in his eyes. This is a 50-year-old man who's lived in many places all over the world. He was VP of a very large bank. And he said, I can't believe I'm standing here. I can't believe I'm standing here and I'm looking at this. And there's all these people around me speaking all these different languages. And, of course, I'm deeply moved. And I'm like, oh, tell me more about this. This is a life-changing moment. And he said, when I was growing up in a village in Nigeria, we had a very small library of 10 books. And one of them was a guidebook to Westminster Abbey. And he had gone through that guidebook growing up. I know, Molly. And there was a picture of this tomb that he was standing in front of. And he said, I could never have pictured a time when I would be standing here with all these different voices looking at this. And that to me, I mean, yes, it was such a powerful, life-changing moment for me, because it was a reminder that global competence isn't just, again, learning the definitions of communication context or what it's like being in a different country. It's really internalizing that we're all bringing these backpacks of our experience with us everywhere we go, and every interaction we have, we're putting some more in that backpack so that when we have to give to other people, we've got a reserve we can pull from. So it was life-changing for him, and probably life-changing for me as well, because I remain committed to the work. And I often think of that student when I'm navigating some political situations or asking for funding. I think of Jim, and I think I want everybody to have that experience.
You're getting a lot of heart reactions, I can see.
Oh,
You
man.
gave me
It was the
goosebumps with that
best.
story.
I actually brought thank you, Jennifer, for sharing that. I actually, as faculty, before becoming the dean, I brought students to a couple of times to Argentina and Chile, and another time to Greece, and so we did Greece and Italy. And it is life-changing. I mean, when you see how much they appreciate those trips and how much they come back with, it is actually life-changing. And it was life-changing to me, seeing that as well. It was life-changing to me.
Oh, thank you.
I think, and Diego, I bet it was extra special bringing them back to your home too. For me, again, I am clearly American, but I spent quite a few years living in the UK as well, and my husband is English, so I've kind of adopted England as my second home. And I felt when I was in London such a sense of pride of like, let me show you this. Let me show you this. I want to also, though, Molly, it's important, I think, for those that are operating in online spaces to know, is it exciting to put boots on the ground and actually be in country physically? Yes, but that's not a possibility for all our learners. So just one small story about somebody that had we designed virtual education abroad experiences too, because it's not a possibility for everyone. And it was actually about the time that the Queen had passed away, and King Charles was about to ascend to the throne. And so we had a session with a member of parliament, a virtual session, who was explaining to the students all about what this meant from a parliamentary viewpoint. And one of my students, much later, sent me a message and said, they were hearing what was going on with Harry and Meghan, and they were leaving, and what was that going to mean? And she said, I understood so much more because I'd had that experience, and I'd had to talk about parliamentary procedure and what it means to have a constitutional monarchy, that when I'm looking at these stories, it's not just gossip in a magazine. I'm actually thinking, are there political implications to this? What does this mean culturally for people in the UK? And I thought, that's what we're here for, is to just open up minds, whether that's in person, whether it's just providing access and opportunity online. It's about facilitating those discussions and planting the seed, not knowing how long it'll take, to kind of reap those benefits.
I think that's beautifully stated. And that aligns so much with the work that we're doing at AFS as well, with both virtual exchanges through our Global Up Americas program that we have going on, and with our, more traditional mobility programs too, and just trying to find opportunities for anyone to access this, intercultural experience, virtual or in person. Thanks for sharing that additional story. Diego, I have a question for you. How does training higher education leaders with global competence improve the quality of education for students specifically?
Great question. First of all, when I think about higher education leaders, I would try to define that, and so I will think about it very broadly. When I think about a leader, I think about, yes, my position, also the department chairs, but also very importantly, when a professor is teaching a class, that person is a leader in their own sense, and also, of course, people that I report to. So when I think about global competence for any of those leaders, I think it can lead to a more inclusive environment. We talked about diversity, equity, and inclusion before. I do believe that if we all have that competence, then the environment that we will foster is a more inclusive environment. We will have more relevant programs. We will form partnerships, international partnerships, relevant international partnerships, and opportunities for students to live diverse cultures. Now, why is that important? That is what we try to create. Well, if you think about the partnerships, if you think about a more inclusive environment, if you think about the experiences that students have, then what we are doing translates into student persistence. It translates into better learning experiences and learning outcomes, and it translates into career outcomes for our students. So I really think that what we do translates into student success.
Beautiful. Yes, I agree with you.
Say it louder for people in the
Yeah,
back.
exactly.
All of that's so good, isn't it? Yes, yes, yes. And I think I'd add to that, when we do all of those things, we also are increasing the benefit to society. So looking at a very high level, when we increase career outcomes, when we increase student persistence and success, when we equip students with these skills by modeling them ourselves as higher ed leaders, as educators, then we send people out into the world who are ready to be emissaries of inclusivity. And, you know, when we're feeling those moments of tension because of politics or economics or racial or ethnic divides, it's because we're sitting in this place of discomfort with the different, what we perceive as the different. I see higher ed as, you know, I go back to kind of the basic definition that higher education universities were gymnasiums of the mind. They were places where we could exercise our critical thinking skills. We could try out different ideas. We could see which ones really resonate with us and which ones don't. But all of that requires being exposed to differences. And universities are amazing places for that to happen, so that when folks leave us, better than when they joined us, they're able to take those learnings out into society as well.
Ooh, I've never heard gymnasium of the mind, Jennifer, and that is a beautiful metaphor for kind of how to think about your universities. Thank you. I was gonna see if Diego wanted to respond to anything that's said there before I move into our last question.
I agree with Jennifer.
Okay, great. Getting a place to practice and having exposure. That just, yeah, that sums it up beautifully and kind of helps with, you know, prioritizing this type of learning at the university level, leadership all the way to students. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. And I don't want to take credit for that thought. I mean, that goes back to sort of why we call schools gymnasiums in the first place in Europe. You know, a lot of schools are defined as gymnasiums for that very reason, that they're places to practice. So while I would love to take credit for that idea, I am only an emissary of it.
Thank you. I recently listened to a conversation with the former president of SNHU, Paul LeBlanc, and he talked a lot about artificial intelligence in higher education and what he predicts for the future. And he was saying how we'll need to move from epistemology to ontology, as well as predicting that students will need critical thinking skills, empathy, human-centered approaches to problem solving, and relational skills over technical knowledge. So this for both of you. When you think about shifting for the future, what's your advice for others at universities if they have to prioritize one or two things in 2025? What would it be?
I'm gonna take it first, Diego.
Either one, I can go first if you want.
Sure.
So first of all, I'm trying to think whether I agree with Paul. Paul is a great thinker for sure, and I do agree that we are in the midst of an artificial intelligence revolution. So it is true in my mind that AI will reduce to some extent the need for basic technical skills, making interpersonal skills of the type that you mentioned, Molly, even more relevant than ever, essential and more relevant than ever. At the same time, AI competence itself is a technical skill. So to me, it is clear that technical knowledge is not going away. In fact, in many ways, technical knowledge and interpersonal skills, at least for some time, will remain complementary rather than substitutes. So when I think again, recommendations, what we are doing, I can mention what we are doing, which is focusing on practical skills, and I would include as a practical skill some technical knowledge, including AI competence. We are focusing on interpersonal skills, and we are focusing on experiential learning, which deals with both the technical side as well as the interpersonal skills. Jennifer?
Yes to all of that. I got you to go first, so you could say you disagreed with Paul. But I agree with you. I think knowing that need is there for those human skills, such as critical thinking, empathy, communication, that's not news. We've known that for a long time. And, a shout out to like the job outlook surveys put out by the National Association of Colleges and Employers. They've been telling us this in their annual surveys for years, that human skills continue to rise to the top of what employers are looking for. At the same time, those surveys are telling us that not all employers feel that graduates are coming out with those skills. So that's told us, that's given us a lot of great information that we need to overtly focus on the development of those skills. And that's one of many reasons that, as Diego mentioned, we're leaning into experiential learning. We don't just want learning to be two-dimensional. We want it to be applied and contextualized. I wouldn't say that those things are prioritized over technical knowledge. I would say in addition to. And Diego's call out to AI competence, I think, is really important because, higher ed is in a slight meltdown over what do we do with this? Cat's out of the bag. So we've got to deal with it. I actually think part of AI competence is, how do I write good prompts? What tools do I use? Those very concrete skills. But you need all those other skills, recognizing bias, critically thinking, effective communication, to be able to utilize those technical skills. So I think they hold hands. And if I had to sum it up for other universities, I would say leaning in towards two things. Number one, experiential learning. And that can take all different kinds of shape. That can be project-based learning. It can be case studies. It can be virtual or in-person education abroad. I mean, there's a million different ways that you can encourage the applied learning. The other piece of that is focusing on AI competence. And part of that is awareness. Even knowing that it's out there, it is always alarming to find out how many people are like, what is ChatGPT? Because it's here and it's going to impact everybody. It's focusing on how to use those tools and then how to use your global competence skills, like recognizing bias or recognizing power and privilege inherent in AI results, to be able to effectively use the tools. So experiential learning and AI competence, if I had to pick just two, I think would be a good place to start.
Excellent. And I think that was actually somebody's question from our chat as well that you just answered there. So thank you, Jennifer. So now I will turn to a couple audience questions. My colleague Pablo has been reading all of your questions and kind of sharing some of them with me. This one I found particularly interesting. So both to Jennifer and Diego, do you think global North higher education institutions are addressing the prescriptive use of strategic essentialism and standpoint theory, with the examples being ideological purity tests, cancel culture, ostracism, in promoting global competence? I can put it in the chat so you can reread that one too.
Yeah, Diego will definitely go first on that one.
I think that I'm having a hard time thinking about the answer to the question, because I believe it might have multiple parts.
Mhm.
I think I could take the second part first, and I've just got the question open so I can have a look at it. I think that they're addressing it? Yes. Do I think it's in an effective way that's yielding positive results? Maybe not. And the reason I think that is all you have to do is look in the news, and even more specifically, if you follow higher ed news, you will see examples of these different things bubbling up. And when we talk about academic freedom, that becomes somewhat problematic, because in some cases we, being the higher ed landscape in general, are mistaking academic freedom with an ability to say anything, no matter who it impacts and how it impacts them. So I think, going back to my non-copyrighted gymnasium of the mind, we have to have those spaces where we practice understanding, being exposed to, thinking about differing viewpoints and narratives. But we also, at the same time, have to have the space to say, I don't know, after thinking about that critically, that I agree with that. It isn't just enough to provide the space to present alternative viewpoints. There has to be the space also for folks to land where they believe, and to be able to express that in ways that are respectful, but don't necessarily curtail even things that might be the minority viewpoint. So it is very much about the balance of how we all show up as ourselves, represent our own beliefs, but do it in a way that continues to foster respect.
Beautifully
Let
stated.
me perhaps in essence, to just agree with Jennifer, and to emphasize perhaps it is. So talking about global North higher education institutions, that's a big word, right? I mean, global North higher ed institutions are so different that it is difficult to talk about in general about all of these institutions. So I'll talk about what I promote and what, to some extent, SNHU promotes, which is, from my perspective, it is all about respect. And to the extent that people are being respectful and we are having respectful conversations, it is also important to allow disagreement, allow dissent, not just allow it. I would go further than that. I think it is important to promote dissent. One of the first things we started talking about is diversity, equity, and inclusion. If we do not promote dissent, people will not feel included, if we do not promote dissent, we will not come up with good answers to the questions. But from my perspective, the important part there too is the respect, being respectful to each other and what others think.
Thank you, Diego. Yes, agreed about the importance of allowing dissent and just kind of sitting with more questions maybe for longer. But also what Jennifer had said about just being respectful that people will find kind of a place to land on how they feel about certain topics, and respect being a center point to kind of focus in on when there is disagreement. We have time for one more question, and I'm going to ask Jennifer this one that came in specifically for her. Jennifer, with such a large student body, do you organize your student database using any cultural markers beyond countries of origin? And could you share about the connection between AFS and SNHU?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me take the easier question first, which is the connection between AFS and SNHU. In the interest of full transparency, Diego and I are here today largely because of my connection with Molly. Molly has been a longtime collaborator. She was with me very early in my creating international strategy career. So our connection is really just that, as trusted peers and colleagues. With SNHU specifically, we, again, just in the interest of transparency, we will be offering the Global Up certificate to our online associate deans. Again, going back to that idea of how do we demonstrate, how do we foster cultural competency within our own administrative team? So just want to make sure that I thought that was such an important question. As far as the question about how do we organize our student database, this is the fourth institution that I've had a full-time role in. And one of the things that never ceases to amaze me is how robustly we track and analyze data. Our student database is organized with so many different demographic markers. Sometimes it allows you to slice the data by different markers. If you're really trying to get down to, just off the top of my head, obviously race and ethnicity. As a side note, Southern New Hampshire University is the largest provider of university education for Black learners, which is a huge privilege and responsibility. We are also the largest institution serving first-generation learners. So we look at those categories. We look at age, gender. We can really slice and dice by as many demographic characteristics as students are comfortable sharing with us. And we do focus initiatives on supporting different groups in different ways, depending on what they need. So for example, a first-generation learner might need something different than a student who's coming in with a lot of transfer credits. So country of origin is very important, but it is not any more or less important than all these other markers of culture, of cultural identity. So I really appreciate that question.
That's, so impressive, the reach of SNHU. I didn't know those stats.
It is. I'm sure Diego will echo this, and I don't just say this to toe a party line. I couldn't be any more proud to work for Southern New Hampshire University because of the scope that they provide. I pinch myself almost every day feeling like I won the career lottery to get to sit in this seat and serve this many learners. It's such an honor.
Amazing. I have a couple more slides just to kind of bring up our evaluation and let all of our audience members know that they are eligible to receive our attendee international education badge. So we'll be emailing this invitation to you following this webinar. You'll receive one badge for attending International Education Week. So you can also get this if you're going to other sessions this week. I'll leave this QR code up just for the next 30 seconds while we're kind of winding down our session today. So you can scan that with a phone, or you can actually, go to this link here. I think it will be available in the chat here shortly too, to fill out a brief survey about our webinar today. I'd like to take a moment to thank Diego and Jennifer for joining us and bringing your expertise to this topic. I believe that was a really fruitful discussion, and I walked away with a couple notes of things that you've generated for me to think more about, especially like the modeling and the trickle down that providing global competence to the leadership offers to universities around the world. And just these business cases for global competence too. So again, just kind of running the spectrum of how we have impact across different relationships and markets. So a couple other just call outs for our International Education Week. We have another session later today honoring Indigenous wisdom and culture through international education. There will be 2 tomorrow, 3 on Wednesday, and 1 on Friday. Please check our link for more opportunities that you can register for and attend. I wanted to also let you know that we have launched our new educational framework. So if you're at a starting place of like, how do I do global competence education? We have a free tool available. And we have a webinar that kind of goes over this educational framework for active global citizenship. I think you'll find it really interesting. We have an in-person event that takes place every August in New York City called the AFS Youth Assembly. You can learn more about that. That's for anyone age 18 to 32 years old. And it is just a beautiful event with people from all over the world that assemble for a few days to talk about the SDGs, United Nations SDGs. And then finally, we have virtual offerings and resources too. So like we mentioned, we really believe in being able to create this learning as accessible as we can make it with both virtual and mobility exchanges as part of our programming. So we have an exchange program for teens, specifically if you have teens in your house, called Global U Adventurer or Changemaker. I mentioned already a lot about our Global Up program. We have facilitation, skill, professional development training, resources for educator, and we have a lot of research available on our webpage too. So thank you everybody for joining. I know we're a couple of minutes over. And again, thank you so much, Diego and Jennifer, for taking the time to share your expertise and reflections with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Molly.
Thank you, everybody. Have a
Bye.
wonderful rest of your day or night. Take care.